The Whitmore Hotel stood at the intersection of 54th and Park like a statement carved in pale limestone and glass. 42 floors that caught the last amber light of late afternoon and held it long after the rest of Manhattan had surrendered to shadow. It was the kind of building that didn't advertise. The people who needed to find it already knew where it was. Sofia Morgan knew where it was because her work had brought her here before. Today, it had been the 31st floor, a closed-door corporate mediation between two pharmaceutical firms that had spent the better part of 3 years disagreeing over a licensing agreement. She had spent 11 hours translating every nuance, every legal distinction, every careful evasion. Her job was not simply to convert words from one language to another. Her job was to carry the full weight of what was said, and more often, what was deliberately left unsaid, and deliver it intact across the table. By 7 in the evening, the mediation had concluded. The attorneys packed their briefcases. The executives exchanged handshakes that meant nothing would actually be resolved for another 6 months. The conference room emptied with the efficient indifference of people who had other rooms to fill. Sofia stayed behind to organize her recordings and collect her notes. She had learned early in her career that the gap between what clients later claimed had been said and what was actually said could determine whether someone spent the next decade in litigation. She took the documentation seriously. It was one of the reasons she was asked back. What she had not taken seriously enough, apparently, was eating. The granola bar she had consumed at 9 in the morning had long since stopped doing anything useful. The coffee she had accepted at noon had sharpened her focus for roughly 2 hours before leaving her with a low, persistent headache she had chosen to override. She was used to long days. She was used to pushing through. Her body had always cooperated with that arrangement. Tonight, it decided not to. She stepped into the hallway at 7:18, portfolio under one arm, phone in hand, calculating the fastest route to anywhere that served actual food. The corridor of the 31st floor was hushed in the way that expensive places were always hushed. Carpet thick enough to swallow sound, walls spaced far enough apart that voices never carried, lighting calibrated to suggest calm rather than illuminate anything useful. She made it approximately 40 feet from the conference room door. The first warning was the narrowing at the edges of her vision, as though someone were drawing curtains slowly inward at the periphery. She recognized the sensation. She had experienced it once years ago after a week of illness. And her first coherent thought was not fear, but irritation. Not here. Not in a hallway where she had no reason to require assistance. Not in front of anyone she might need to work alongside again. She reached for the wall. Her fingers found only air. The elevator doors at the far end of the corridor slid open at precisely that moment. She didn't see the man who stepped out. She was already falling. What she felt instead of the marble floor was an arm, firm, immediate, and absolutely certain. The kind of grip that didn't fumble or adjust or hesitate. It caught her at the shoulder and pulled her upright before her knees had fully buckled, the force of it dragging the collar of her blouse sideways for an instant before the fabric settled back into place. And for a suspended moment, she was held between the falling and the floor, supported by something solid enough that the impact never came. A voice followed, low and controlled, carrying the particular quality of someone accustomed to being understood without needing to repeat themselves. Get the doctor, now. Not loud, not alarmed, simply final. Sofia became aware of the floor beneath her feet again, and then of the fact that she was not fully on it. She was being held against someone's side with a steadiness that felt less like courtesy and more like a decision already made. She blinked. The narrowing at the edges of her vision was retreating. The hallway reassembled itself around her. The carpet, the wall sconces casting their warm light, a second man already speaking quietly into a phone, the cool, recycled air of the 31st floor settling back into place. And the man holding her. He was looking down at her with an expression that wasn't easily named. Not alarm, not irritation. Something more deliberate than either. He was tall and broad in a way that suggested structure rather than effort. Dark hair, swept back neatly. His eyes, when she found them, were a deep, warm brown. the kind that held light rather than reflected it. They were completely focused on her, with the measured attention of someone determining the nature of a problem he had not yet decided whether to solve. "Can you hear me?" he asked. "Yes," Sofia said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "I'm fine. I didn't eat today." He didn't move. "That's not fine," he said. "It's not serious," she clarified. "Those aren't the same thing." She might have argued, but the arm around her shoulders was the only reason she was upright, and she was aware enough to recognize that negotiating from a position of literal physical dependence was not her strongest play. The doctor arrived in under 4 minutes, a compact, efficient man in a dark jacket who introduced himself without making it sound optional and proceeded to check her pulse, blood pressure, and pupils with the brisk professionalism of someone who had attended to this exact situation in expensive hotels many times before and had learned not to be visibly curious about the particulars. She was in a suite, she realized. Not the conference corridor she had stepped out of, but a private wing off the same floor, with a different register of quiet. Double doors that had already been opened led into a large, still room with tall windows framing the city in its last blue hour before full dark. Manhattan going from amber to steel, all lit towers and moving light below. She sat on the edge of a cream-colored sofa while the doctor worked. The man who had caught her stood near the window, unhurried, his jacket perfectly undisturbed, his hands resting in his pockets. He watched with the patience of someone who had decided to wait and found waiting genuinely untroubling. "Your blood pressure is low, but not at a level that concerns me," the doctor said, snapping his bag shut. "You need food and water. Nothing more is indicated." He looked at her with the mild reproach of a professional whose expertise had been called upon for something entirely preventable. "I'd recommend not skipping meals before 11-hour engagements." "Noted," Sofia said. The doctor spoke briefly to the man by the window, low enough that Sofia caught only tone, not words, and excused himself. The room settled into a different kind of quiet. Sofia straightened her posture, set her portfolio on the cushion beside her, and turned her attention to the man who was still standing there, as if he had nowhere else to be. "I should thank you," she said. "You caught me before I hit the floor." "You were going to hit it fairly hard," he said. "I know." A pause. "I'm Sofia Morgan. I was interpreting for a session on this floor today. I should have been more careful about eating." He considered her for a moment. Not appraising, not dismissive. "Cataloging. Luca Conti," he said. "I had a meeting on this floor." The name settled into the air between them without elaboration. He offered no further context, and something in the economy of it told her he rarely did. She noted the 2 men positioned near the door, close enough to be useful, positioned with the practiced inconspicuousness of people who had been doing it for years. She had worked in enough rooms with powerful men to recognize the particular grammar of protection, the way space quietly rearranged itself around someone who required guarding. She filed the observation away, without comment. "Thank you, Mr. Conti," she said simply. "I'm sorry for the disruption." "You didn't disrupt anything." He moved then, toward the door, a motion that was neither abrupt nor drawn out, the pace of someone whose time had structure and who extended the same assumption to others. He exchanged a few quiet words with one of his men, who crossed the room to where Sofia was sitting. The man held out a plain card, a phone number, nothing else, no name printed, no title, no logo. "Mr. Conti wanted you to have a direct line," the man said, "in case you need anything before you leave the building, or if you're unwell again." Sofia accepted the card. She looked at it briefly, then looked toward the door, where Luca had paused with one hand resting against the frame. "That's thoughtful," she said. "Thank you." He gave a single nod, not a warmth, not a dismissal, something precisely balanced between the two. And he was gone. The door settled closed without a sound. Sofia sat in the quiet suite a moment longer. She drank the glass of water someone had placed on the side table. She found the wrapped crackers the doctor had apparently left and ate them without ceremony. She thought about the way he had moved when she was falling. Not the hesitation of someone deciding whether to help. the immediacy of someone who had already decided before the question formed. She thought about his expression when he looked down at her in the hallway. She had been working for 4 years in rooms full of carefully composed faces, and she had developed a precise sensitivity to the difference between a reaction someone was controlling and a reaction someone was genuinely feeling. What she had seen on his face in that first moment was neither alarm nor calculation. It was recognition. She dismissed it. She was a freelance translator who had fainted in a hotel corridor. They had no prior connection. She had probably misread him. She gathered her portfolio, straightened her jacket, and rode the elevator down to the lobby and out into the cool dark of the city. On the 31st floor, Luca stood at the window that Sofia had just been facing. Manhattan was fully dark now, towers lit against a sky the color of deep charcoal, the city moving in its usual indifferent rhythm 42 floors below. He was not thinking about the meeting he had just left, or the one waiting for him in the morning. He was not thinking about logistics or scheduling or any of the dozen things that would require his attention before midnight. He was thinking about a mark on a woman's shoulder, a fleur-de-lis, precise and deliberate, with a sword running vertically through its center, a symbol he had not seen in 18 years, not since he had stood over his father's grave at the age of 18 and understood, with the particular clarity that only grief and rage together can produce, that the family who had arranged that peace meeting had never intended for his father to leave it alive. The symbol of the Mancini family, on the shoulder of a woman who translated contracts and fainted because she forgot to eat. He turned the card over in his mind, the number he had passed to her, the small, deliberate thread he had placed between them before letting her walk out that door. In his line of work, threads were not given by accident. Every connection was intentional, and every intentional connection had a purpose. He did not yet know what Sofia Morgan was to the Mancini family, or what the Mancini family was to her. He did not know whether she was a weapon aimed at him, or simply a woman who had been marked by people she trusted without understanding what that mark carried. He would find out. He would find out everything. And she would leave tonight believing it had been nothing more than a stranger's good timing and a doctor's visit paid for by a man with resources he had not mentioned. That was, for now, exactly what he needed her to believe. The dossier arrived at 6:42 the following morning, delivered by a man named Vito, who had worked for the Conti family for 19 years and understood that the most valuable quality in his position was not efficiency, but discretion. He set the folder on Luca's desk without comment and left the room without being dismissed. Luca was already at his desk. He hadn't slept particularly well, which was not unusual. The coffee beside him was his second cup. He opened the folder. Sofia Morgan, 27 years old. Born in Providence, Rhode Island. Freelance translator and certified court interpreter, specializing in Italian, Spanish, and legal documentation. 4 years in independent practice following a 2-year staff position with a mid-size firm in Lower Manhattan. Consistent clientele across 3 law firms and 2 financial institutions. Clean record. No litigation history. A modest apartment in the Upper West Side, 2 blocks from Riverside Drive. He turned the page. Biological parents, David Morgan and Claire Morgan, born Harwell. Both killed in a car accident on Route 95 outside Providence when Sofia was 7 years old. No surviving family on either side. She had been placed briefly in the state foster system, briefly being the operative word. Within 8 weeks, she had been transferred to the care of Giovanni Mancini and his household through a private legal arrangement that had moved through the family court system with the kind of speed that suggested someone had been persuaded not to ask questions. No blood relation to the Mancini family. The adoption had been formalized within a year. Luca set the page down and looked at the wall for a moment. He picked it up again. The tattoo, confirmed as a Mancini family marking, applied as part of what the family referred to internally as a binding ritual, a practice Giovanni Mancini had maintained with the small circle of individuals he considered bound to the household by loyalty rather than lineage. Sofia had received it at age 12. Records from one of the family's longtime physicians confirmed the procedure. There was no indication she had ever been told its broader significance beyond whatever explanation a 12-year-old would accept from a man who had given her a home, and a last name she had no reason to question. He closed the folder. She hadn't known. Or she had known only what Giovanni had chosen to tell her, which in Luca's experience amounted to the same thing. Giovanni Mancini had collected people the way other men collected assets, quietly, with a clear sense of their future utility, and without extending to them the courtesy of explaining the terms. Luca set up a standard monitoring arrangement. Not active surveillance, not yet. His contacts who tracked peripheral Mancini movement would flag anything connected to her name or address. It was the same protocol he maintained for anyone orbiting the family without sitting at its center. Precautionary, unobtrusive, a standing instruction. He went about his day. The flag came 47 hours later. Not a message, a direct call from a man named Arturo, who managed a stretch of the Upper West Side for reasons entirely unrelated to Sofia Morgan, but who had spent 6 years learning to identify Mancini operatives in his territory on site. One of them had been inside Sofia Morgan's building. Second floor, rear entrance, in and out in under 12 minutes. Luca called her before she reached her front door. She answered on the second ring. Her voice carried the particular quality of someone who had just climbed several flights of stairs, slightly winded, not alarmed. "Mr. Conti," she said, with the composed curiosity of someone who hadn't expected the call but wasn't unsettled by it. "Don't go into your apartment yet," Luca said. "Are you in the hallway?" A brief pause. "On my floor, yes." "Why?" "Someone entered your apartment today. One of my contacts flagged movement in your building earlier this evening. Stay in the hallway until I send someone." The pause that followed wasn't panic. It was the pause of someone running through available information and deciding what to do with it. "Understood," she said. "How long?" 20 minutes. "All right." She waited. When his man confirmed the apartment was clear, searched without violence, nothing visibly removed, she went inside and Luca stayed on the line. Her voice remained steady throughout. She described what she found with the detachment of someone compiling a report. Work folders shifted from their usual position on the desk, her laptop left open at a different angle than she kept it. A drawer in her filing cabinet pulled out 1.5 inches. Nothing taken, nothing destroyed. "They weren't looking for valuables," she said. "No," Luca confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You already knew this was a possibility. That's why you left the number." It wasn't an accusation. It was a precise observation, offered in the tone of someone who wanted it confirmed rather than debated. "Yes," he said. "Then I think you should tell me what's actually happening," she said. "I'd rather understand what I'm dealing with than spend the next week operating on incomplete information." He told her what she needed to know. Not the full weight of it, not the tattoo, not Giovanni's history, not the 18 years Luca carried like a debt he hadn't accrued but would spend his life paying. The immediate facts. 6 weeks ago, she had accepted a translation assignment from a firm called Hartley & Associates. The document she worked on contained embedded financial data tied to an ongoing legal matter involving a man named Silvio Mancini. She had almost certainly been given it without any flag. But the Mancini family maintained close watch over anything that touched their legal exposure. And her name had appeared in the document's handling trail. "They want to know what I retained," she said. "And what you may have passed on," Luca confirmed. "I don't keep client documents after delivery. It's written into every contract I sign. They don't know that, or they want to be certain you haven't made exceptions." She absorbed this without filling the silence unnecessarily. He could hear her moving through the apartment, the sound of something set down on a hard surface, the subtle shift in acoustics as she moved between rooms. "What do you recommend?" she asked. "I have a property in Brooklyn, secure. You'd have your own space, a full work setup, everything you need while this gets resolved. How long are we talking about?" "I don't know yet. Realistically, weeks, not days." Another pause. This one had a different quality than the others. Not resistance. Genuine consideration, the kind that deserved to be waded through. "Can I bring my work materials?" she asked. I have 2 active contracts with deadlines. Bring whatever you need. Then I'll pack tonight. A brief hesitation. There's one other thing. Go ahead. The Hartley document, the original version, not the excerpt I was handed for translation. I want to see it. Luca was quiet. Why? He asked. Because I translated something without understanding what it actually contained, she said. And that bothers me on a professional level. I'm not willing to set aside. I'm not asking to be pulled into whatever you're managing. I'm asking to understand the specific thing that put me in this position. Knowing the exact scope of what I inadvertently touched will help me think clearly, and thinking clearly is the most useful thing I can do right now. It was, he thought, an argument built from logic rather than emotion, made without apology or performance. I'll see what can be arranged, he said. That's all I'm asking, she said. His driver brought her to the Brooklyn property at 9:30 that evening. She arrived with a rolling suitcase, a laptop bag, and a secondary bag that appeared to hold a substantial collection of professional references. Thick binders, 2 hardback legal dictionaries, a folder system she had clearly packed with the priorities of someone who intended to keep working. She stood in the front room of the brownstone and assessed it with the practical eye of someone deciding how to arrange a workspace rather than how to feel about being removed from her own. The study down the hall has a large desk, Luca said. North-facing window. Best light in the morning. Good, she said. That's where I'll set up. She moved toward the hallway with her bags. One of his men, positioned near the kitchen doorway, glanced briefly at Luca, with an expression that asked nothing but communicated something close to quiet surprise. Luca didn't acknowledge it. He moved to the window facing the street instead, a habit that served as much as a pause as a precaution, and looked at the darkened row of brownstones across the way. The block was quiet. A cab moved through the intersection at the far end. Ordinary city noise, the kind that meant nothing was immediately wrong. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew a folder he had brought from the car. Partial documentation pulled from the Hartley file. Not the full record, but enough to give her a genuine picture of what she had handled and why it had drawn attention. He had made the decision in the car on the way over. She had asked a reasonable question and given a clear reason for asking it. Withholding the answer served his caution at the expense of her cooperation. And her cooperation, he had already recognized, was worth more than keeping her uninformed. He set the folder on the side table near the study door. She would find it in the morning, and he would pay close attention to what she did next, because a person's first instinct, when handed information they weren't expecting to receive, told you more about their character than most things they would ever say directly. Luca had built 19 years of decisions on reading people correctly. He did not intend to misread this one. The Hartley folder was open on the desk when Luca arrived at the Brooklyn property the following morning. Sofia had moved the side table closer to the window and arranged her own materials in a clean parallel system alongside the documents he had left. Her binders open to specific sections, a set of handwritten notes on a yellow legal pad, 3 separate color-coded tabs she had already added to the Hartley file itself. She was at the desk with her second coffee, a pen in her hand reading. She looked up when he entered, but didn't close anything or shift posture in the way people sometimes did when they wanted to appear less absorbed than they were. She simply noted his presence and turned back to the page she was on. The Hartley document wasn't a standard licensing agreement, she said, without preamble. The section I was handed for translation, the Italian clauses, were peripheral, procedural. But the document itself references a holding structure in Delaware that ties to at least 2 other entities I've seen referenced in Mancini-related filings. Luca set his jacket over the back of a chair. I know. I want to understand the full structure, she said. If you're going to let me work in here with half a picture, I'll only be half useful. I'm not saying that to be difficult. It's a practical observation. He looked at her for a moment. At the organized desk, the tabbed documents, the legal pad already dense with notes after a single morning. She had not spent the night being afraid. She had spent it working. He pulled the second chair to the edge of the desk and sat. What do you need? He asked. The financial records tied to the holding structures. not prosecution material. I understand the sensitivity. But the corporate layer, entity names, registration dates, signatory trails if you have them. Why signatory trails? Because the way these agreements are signed tells you more about actual control than any corporate charter. Whoever signs has exposure. Whoever avoids signing has awareness they're trying to insulate. She tapped the legal pad. I've already identified 3 entities in the Hartley document that share a registered agent in Wilmington. If there's a 4th, and there usually is, it will be the one they use for actual movement. Luca called Ferraro that afternoon. Not for the financial records. Those he managed through a separate channel with his own attorneys. For Ferraro, he had a different request. The archive room in the Conti property on the upper floor contained filing boxes going back 2 decades. Several of them predated Luca's direct management of the family's operations, inherited from his father's era and never fully catalogued. He needed them brought to Brooklyn, specifically the boxes from the mid-2000s. He wanted Sofia to have access to historical entity names. Some of the holding structures the Mancini family had used in that period had never been formally dissolved. If any of them appeared in the current documentation, it would establish a continuity of operation that would matter considerably in a legal proceeding. Ferraro arrived the following morning with 4 banker's boxes, stacked on a hand truck, untriaged, and in the original order they had been stored. He brought them into the study, set them near the far wall, exchanged a brief word with Luca, and left. Sofia spent the rest of that day and the better part of the next cross-referencing. She worked with the systematic patience of someone for whom dense documentation was not a burden, but a language. One she had spent years learning to read at speed. She flagged 7 entity names that appeared in both the Hartley material and the older Conti records, which confirmed they had been active across multiple decades and multiple operations. She drafted a clean summary and left it on the corner of the desk for Luca's attorneys. On the afternoon of the second day, she stopped. Luca was in the adjacent room when she appeared in the doorway. She was holding a single page, not from the financial boxes, but from a separate folder she must have found near the bottom of the 4th box. It was aged paper, the edges slightly yellowed, the type from an older printer. She was holding it carefully, with the particular deliberateness of someone who has already read something twice and is deciding how to carry it into a room. This was in the archive, she said. She set it on the table in front of him. It was an internal report, 2 pages, but she had brought only the first. The date at the top was 18 years ago. The subject line referenced a scheduled negotiation, described in the careful neutral language of someone writing for an internal audience, and the final paragraph outlined in brief and businesslike terms that the meeting had been arranged not as a genuine negotiation, but as a controlled conclusion. The name at the authorization line was Giovanni Mancini, the name of the man whose peace meeting had ended with Luca's father dead at 51 years old, shot twice in a room where he had arrived without weapons because the terms of the meeting had required it, was written in standard typeface on a document that had been sitting in a filing box for 18 years. Luca read it once. He set it down. He didn't move for a long moment. "I suspected," he said finally. "I've suspected since I was 18 years old. I knew the pattern. I knew the family. I had enough to be certain in every way that didn't require documentation." A pause. "This is the first time I've seen it written." Sofia sat down in the chair across from him. She didn't offer condolence or commentary. She simply stayed in the room, which was, he had already learned about her, how she expressed that she understood weight. "I found it in the archive Ferraro brought," she said. "It was filed with budget documents from the same year. I don't think anyone put it there intentionally." "No," Luca said. "My father's assistant survived him by 3 years. She was meticulous. She would have filed everything that crossed her desk regardless of what it contained." He looked at the page again. She probably didn't read it closely enough to understand what it was. Sofia was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured, not hesitant, but careful in the way of someone choosing precision over speed. "I want to ask you something," she said. He looked up. My parents, she said. The accident on Route 95. I've been told my whole life that it was a car accident. I was 7. I have very little memory of the period directly before or after. She held his gaze without difficulty. You've been running a file on me since the hotel. Your people are thorough. I'd like to know if you found anything about how they died that isn't in the official record. The question had been waiting. He had known, somewhere in the hours since he first read her dossier, that it would arrive eventually. He had not decided in those hours what he would do when it did. He looked at her now, at the careful composure she maintained, the steadiness that wasn't suppression but genuine orientation. And he decided. I need a few hours, he said. What I have from the initial file isn't complete. Let me make some calls. She nodded once. I'll keep working. He made 3 calls. The third reached a man who had spent 30 years moving between law enforcement and private intelligence, and who owed Luca a specific debt from 6 years prior that had never been formally collected. Within 2 hours, he had sent a scanned document, a private investigator's report commissioned in the year of the accident by an insurance firm that had quietly dropped the claim. The report had never been made public. The firm had settled out of court with Giovanni Mancini's legal team within 4 months. The accident had not been accidental. David and Claire Morgan had accumulated a significant financial obligation to Giovanni Mancini. The specific origin of the debt was not documented in the report, but the amount and the timeline placed it in the period of a failed business arrangement from the year prior. They had defaulted. The car had been run off the road on a night stretch of highway with no witnesses and no working cameras. The police report had been filed by a trooper whose name appeared twice in unrelated Mancini-adjacent investigations over the following decade. Sofia had been in the car and survived. She had been 7 years old, and 3 months later, Giovanni Mancini had initiated adoption proceedings. Luca walked back into the study at 6 in the evening. Sofia looked up from the desk. She read his expression, or perhaps the quality of his silence, before he said anything, because she set the pen down and turned to face him fully, bracing for something she had already half prepared herself to hear. He told her plainly. He did not soften the sequence or arrange it for impact. He told her what the report said about the debt, about the road, about the trooper, about the timeline that ended with a man who had arranged her parents' deaths, becoming her legal guardian 8 weeks later. She did not cry. She did not look away. She sat very still with her hands resting flat on the desk, and he watched the information move through her, not breaking anything, but rearranging everything, the way structural damage works slowly and then all at once. He kept me, she said after a long silence. He raised me. I called him. She stopped, started again. I called him a version of father for 20 years. Yes, Luca said. Did Silvio know? I don't know yet. Silvio was 22 when this happened. Whether Giovanni brought him into it or kept it separate is something I can't confirm from what I have. She processed that. Her eyes moved to the middle distance for a moment, tracking something internal, some recalibration happening below the surface of her composure. Your father, she said. Giovanni ordered his death. Yes. And my parents. She brought her gaze back to his. The same man. Yes. The room held that between them without collapsing under it, which was perhaps the only remarkable thing about that moment, that 2 people could sit across from one another with that much destruction in the space between them and not be flattened by it. What do you need from me? Sofia asked. Luca looked at her. The question, practical, direct, oriented toward what came next rather than what couldn't be changed, was perhaps the clearest indication of who she actually was, stripped of circumstance and context, and the careful professional composure she wore in unfamiliar rooms. I need you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing, he said. The work you've put together on the holding structures is more than my attorneys have managed in 6 months. And now we both have reason to see this finished. She looked at the desk, the documents, the legal pad, the 18 years of corporate architecture she had been methodically disassembling for 2 days. Then we should keep working, she said. She picked up her pen. She didn't come out of her room until nearly noon the following day. Luca didn't send anyone to check on her, didn't manufacture a reason to knock. He had told her everything he knew the previous evening, and he understood, in the way that people who have carried their own grief for years develop an instinct for recognizing it in others, that she needed the morning to herself, not to fall apart. Sofia Morgan did not appear to be a person who fell apart easily, but there was a difference between functioning under pressure and having the space to actually absorb what functioning under pressure had prevented you from absorbing. She deserved the latter. He gave it to her without announcement. When she appeared in the kitchen doorway at 11:47, she was dressed, her hair pulled back, her expression carrying the particular quality of someone who had looked directly at something difficult and come out the other side with their footing intact. She poured coffee, stood at the counter for a moment, and then turned to face him with the directness he had come to expect from her in every preceding interaction. "I want to keep moving," she said. "Standing still doesn't sit well with me." "I know," he said. "Then I have a proposal." She had thought it through overnight. He could tell from the way she presented it, not tentatively, not as a question dressed up as a suggestion, but as a structured argument. She had 2 active client relationships with firms in Manhattan that she had worked with for more than 2 years. One of them, Kellner and Associates, had engaged her 3 times in the past year for routine terminology review on Italian-language commercial contracts. It was unremarkable work by any measure, the kind of engagement she could request under a standard professional pretense without raising any flags in her billing history. The Mancini holding structure she had identified in the financial documents had a registered agent at an address that shared suite space with a firm called Ardmore Commercial Advisory. Ardmore had a public-facing portfolio that included Italian-language documentation from European trade partnerships. It was thin cover, but thin cover was what most shell entities relied on, the assumption that nobody would look closely enough to notice. "I can submit a request for a document sample under the pretense of a terminology alignment project," she said. "It's the kind of thing I've done before for firms I've worked with. It won't look unusual from the outside. If Ardmore is what I think it is, the documents they return will confirm the connection to the Mancini financial chain." Luca listened to all of it before he responded. "You understand that if Silvio's people are watching your professional activity, and at this point we have to assume they are, any movement you make under your own name carries risk." "I understand that," she said, "which is why I'm not proposing to walk into an office unaccompanied. I'm proposing a controlled operation with whatever cover you think is appropriate on a timeline we agree on together." He studied her for a moment. The proposal was sound. The logic was clean. She wasn't minimizing the exposure. She was accounting for it and asking him to help manage it, which was a different thing entirely. "We do it Friday," he said. "I need 2 days to set the perimeter. You submit the request today through standard channels, so the timestamp looks routine. The actual retrieval happens at the end of the week, in person, with 2 of my people within sight of the building at all times." "Agreed," she said. She poured a second cup of coffee and went back to the study. She submitted the request at 2:00 that afternoon. Kellner and Associates confirmed by end of day. Ardmore responded to the forwarded inquiry by Thursday morning, brief, professional, attaching a preliminary document set with the particular eagerness of an entity that wanted to appear cooperative. Sofia had the documents analyzed by Thursday evening. She came to find Luca in the main room with her legal pad and sat across from him without preamble. 3 states, she said, New York, New Jersey, and Florida. The Florida connection runs through a property management company that on paper handles vacation rental portfolios, but hasn't filed a single occupancy tax return in 4 years. She turned the legal pad toward him. The New Jersey piece is more interesting. There's a construction subcontracting firm that received 7 separate payments from Mancini-linked entities over an 18-month period. The amounts are just under the reporting threshold each time. Structuring, Luca said, deliberately and systematically. The documentation Ardmore sent is exactly what I expected. They didn't redact anything significant because they didn't think anyone reading it would know what to look for. She leaned back slightly. They were wrong about that. Luca looked at the notes. The work was precise and thorough, not the broad strokes of someone assembling a rough picture, but the detailed mapping of someone who understood that the evidentiary value of financial documentation depended entirely on the specificity of its connections. She had given him something his attorneys could use. "This is good work," he said. "It's what I came here to do," she said simply. It was late Friday evening when Ferraro arrived unannounced. He came to the back entrance, which alone indicated something was wrong. Ferraro used the back only when he didn't want to be seen arriving, which in 19 years had happened twice. Luca met him in the rear hallway. The man's face was the color of old concrete, and his hands, which were usually steady, were not steady. Luca said nothing. He waited. It took Ferraro 40 seconds to begin, and when he did, he spoke looking at the wall rather than at Luca. The posture of a man delivering a confession he had already been carrying for too long. His family, his wife and his younger brother, who had been staying with her while recovering from surgery, taken 9 days ago, not from their home, from a parking structure in Hoboken, efficiently and without witnesses. He had received a phone call from a number that routed through a relay he couldn't trace, a voice he didn't recognize, a list of instructions that boiled down to a single demand: report Sofia Morgan's movements and work activity, or his wife would not be returned intact. He had told Silvio's people when Sofia submitted the Ardmore request. He had told them she was working with financial documentation on the Mancini holding structure. He had told them she was operating out of a location in Brooklyn without giving the specific address, but the address could be narrowed from context if Silvio's people were already watching the borough. He had not told Luca because he did not believe Luca could move fast enough to get his family out before Silvio acted on the threat. He had been managing it alone for 9 days and had run out of road. Luca listened to all of it without interruption. When Ferraro finished, the silence between them lasted long enough to have real weight. "Where are they?" Luca asked. Ferraro gave him an address in Bayonne, a warehouse property registered to a shipping company that Luca's contacts had flagged twice in the previous 2 years without finding sufficient reason to act on. He had his team moving within 14 minutes. He gave specific instructions: extract, do not engage beyond what was necessary to ensure safe removal. Bring them directly to a secure location in Queens where Ferraro's wife could be assessed by a doctor. The extraction took 40 minutes. His team encountered 3 men at the property. None of them were Silvio's senior people. They were hired perimeter, the kind of contract presence that dissolved quickly when faced with coordinated opposition. Ferraro's wife had a bruised wrist and hadn't slept properly in 9 days. His brother was shaken but unharmed. While his team was still en route, Luca received a separate alert from his contact watching the Kellner building in Manhattan. 2 men had arrived at the firm's service entrance early that evening, presenting credentials from a document courier service that Kellner did not use. They had asked for the Ardmore materials by name. The firm's evening security manager, acting on protocols Luca had put in place 48 hours prior without explaining the full reason, had refused access and triggered an internal flag. Silvio had sent people for the documents. Not for Sofia, not for Luca. For the paper trail. Which meant he knew the paper trail existed and understood what it could do. It also meant the address hadn't been compromised. The Kellner approach had been a parallel move, not a coordinated one. Silvio was running 2 threads simultaneously because he wasn't certain which one would yield results first. Neither had. Luca returned to the main room and told Sofia what had happened. Ferraro, the family, the Kellner attempt, without softening any of it. She absorbed the information without the kind of reaction that would have been understandable but unhelpful. She asked 3 specific questions: whether Ferraro's family was physically safe, whether the Brooklyn location remained secure, and whether Silvio now knew the document work had progressed as far as it had. His family is out. This location is still clean. And yes, Silvio knows you've been working. He doesn't know exactly what you found, but the Ardmore request told him enough to act. She considered this with the stillness that he had stopped mistaking for passivity 3 days ago. It was, he had come to understand, how she thought, fully and without performance. Then we need to move faster than he expects, she said. Ferraro sat in the kitchen, his hands wrapped around a glass of water, his face carrying the exhaustion of someone who had spent 9 days holding something impossible without letting it show. Luca stood in the doorway and looked at the man who had worked beside him for nearly 2 decades, who had done something Luca could not condone and could not entirely blame, who had been squeezed between an impossible threat and an equally impossible loyalty, and had made the only choice that felt survivable at the time. "Your family is safe," Luca said. "That's what matters tonight." Ferraro looked up. "I need everything you gave them," Luca said. "Every contact, every relay number, every detail of what they asked and what you provided. All of it." "Yes," Ferraro said. "And then you're stepping back from active operations, not as punishment, as structure. You understand why?" Ferraro nodded slowly, the nod of a man who had already known this was coming and had made peace with it on the drive over. "I understand," he said. Across the hall, through the open study door, Luca could see the edge of the desk where Sofia had spread her documentation across 3 organized sections: the legal pad, the color-coded folders, the quiet, systematic architecture of a woman who had been handed a reason to let someone else fight her battles and had chosen instead to be the most prepared person in the room. Silvio Mancini had expected a freelance translator, someone who could be frightened into compliance or maneuvered into irrelevance. He had sent 2 men to retrieve paper because he still believed the damage was containable. He had badly misjudged what he was dealing with. The conversation happened at the kitchen table, which had become, over the preceding days, the place where the real decisions got made. The study was for work. The kitchen was for everything that required 2 people facing each other without documentation between them. Sofia had laid out the argument the previous evening, after Ferraro had gone and the house had settled into its late-night quiet. She had been methodical about it, which Luca had come to expect, and direct, which he had come to rely on. The package they had assembled, the financial documentation mapping the holding structures across 3 states, the Ardmore materials, the corporate signatory trails, the report confirming the forged accident on Route 95, and Ferraro's full written account of what Silvio's people had demanded and when was substantial. It was the kind of material that could move a federal investigation from theoretical to operational, but its evidentiary value depended entirely on the chain of custody through which it arrived. "If any of your people deliver it," Sofia said, "the defense will spend the first 6 months arguing that the material was compiled by or for a competing criminal organization and therefore cannot be considered independently obtained. It won't sink the case, but it will delay it long enough for Silvio to restructure, move assets, and potentially get ahead of it." "I know that," Luca said. "I've worked as a court interpreter for Andrew Cole's office on 3 separate occasions over the past 2 years. He knows my professional background. He knows I don't manufacture things, and I don't operate with an agenda beyond the accuracy of what I'm handling." She kept her eyes on his. "If I deliver it, the provenance is a freelance translator who uncovered the connection through a legitimate professional engagement and followed the documentation to its source. That's a chain of custody he can work with. It also puts your name on a federal filing that Silvio's lawyers will see within 48 hours of his arrest," Luca said. "After that, your name is permanently attached to this." "My name is already attached to this," she said. "It was attached the moment I translated that Hartley document. The only question is whether I'm attached to it as a victim who cooperated under pressure or as someone who made an active and documented choice." She paused. "I prefer the second." He was quiet for a long moment. "You go with 2 of my people outside the building," he said finally. "Not inside. I understand why they can't be inside. But within line of sight of every entrance from the moment you leave this property until you are back through that door." "Agreed," she said. "And you call me the moment you're in Cole's office and again the moment you leave." "I will." He looked at her across the table in the specific way he had developed over the past 10 days of close proximity, the look that wasn't assessment anymore, because the assessment had long since concluded, but something he hadn't fully named and wasn't ready to examine in the middle of everything else that required his attention. "All right," he said. She called Cole's office at 8 the following morning. His assistant put her through within 4 minutes, which was the particular efficiency of someone whose time was genuinely limited rather than performatively guarded. Cole remembered her immediately. She had spent 3 days in a federal courtroom the previous spring providing simultaneous interpretation for a trade fraud proceeding. And he had told her afterward that her work had been the most precise he had encountered in 11 years handling federal fraud matters. "I have documentation I need to deliver in person," she said. "It relates to an active matter involving a family named Mancini. I believe it will be relevant to your office." A brief pause. "How soon can you come in?" "This afternoon, if your schedule permits." 2 o'clock, he said. "Use the Foley Square entrance. Tell the desk you're expected." She dressed that morning with the practicality of someone preparing for a professional engagement rather than anything more dramatic. Dark trousers, a cream blouse, a structured charcoal jacket she had brought from her apartment. She gathered the documentation into a legal carry case she had organized the night before. Each section flagged and indexed with the same precision she applied to every work product she delivered. Luca's 2 men, Caruso and a younger operative named Gallo, were already outside when she walked to the car. They rode to Lower Manhattan without conversation beyond the necessary logistics. At Foley Square, they deployed to positions she could identify without effort, which was the point. Close enough to matter, invisible enough not to complicate what she was about to do. She went in alone. Cole's office was on the 4th floor, a working space rather than an impressive one, the walls carrying the particular accumulation of a man who had occupied the same room for a decade without particularly noticing what went on them. He stood when she entered and shook her hand with the directness of someone who had trained himself not to waste the first 3 minutes of any meeting on pleasantries. She laid the documentation on his conference table in sequence. She walked him through the structure the way she had first laid it out for Luca's attorneys. The holding companies, the state-by-state operations, the structuring pattern in the New Jersey payments, the Ardmore connection, the Route 95 report. Cole took notes in a compressed, nearly illegible hand. He asked 11 questions, all of them precise, none of them redundant. When she reached Ferraro's written account, Cole set his pen down. "This individual, is he available to provide direct testimony?" "He's prepared to," she said. "He has conditions related to the safety of his family, which I'd ask your office to consider seriously given what they were subjected to. But yes, he'll cooperate." Cole picked his pen back up. He wrote for another 30 seconds without speaking. "Ms. Morgan," he said, still writing, "how did you come to be in possession of documentation of this scope?" She had prepared for the question. She gave him the full answer, the Hartley translation, the apartment entry, the Brooklyn property, the Ardmore operation, the Ferraro disclosure, without omitting or obscuring the fact that she had been in contact with Luca Conti throughout. She told him what Conti's involvement had been and what it had not been. She was direct about the distinction. Cole listened to all of it without expression. "I'll note that the manner of collection presents some complexity," he said. "I expected that. The Ardmore request was submitted under my own professional credentials through a standard channel. The financial documents were cross-referenced against corporate public records and filings. The signatory trails are drawn entirely from documentation the entities themselves submitted to state authorities. There's a clean thread through all of it that doesn't require Mr. Conti's involvement to establish." Cole looked at her for a moment with the evaluating attention of someone deciding whether a witness was credible or merely competent. They were different things, in his experience, and most people were only the latter. "I'll have my team begin review today," he said. She was back through the door of the Brooklyn property at 4:18. She called Luca from the car as she had agreed. He answered before the second ring. "It's done," she said. "He took everything. He's moving quickly." A pause that held more than its length suggested. "Good," Luca said. "Come back." While she had been at Foley Square, one of Luca's monitoring contacts had flagged Silvio Mancini leaving his residence in Westchester with 2 bags and a car service booking to Newark. Not JFK, not LaGuardia, Newark, where he had connections to a private terminal operator who had processed 3 of his international movements in the previous 4 years. The move was calculated. Silvio had decided that departure was more survivable than confrontation. Luca tracked the movement but did not intercept it. Silvio reaching an airport was not the outcome. Silvio being taken by federal authorities on the basis of legitimate evidence was the outcome. The difference mattered in ways that went beyond strategy. He passed the real-time location to Cole's office at 4:43 through a channel that kept his name at one remove but ensured the information arrived. It was the kind of assistance that left no fingerprints and served everyone's purposes simultaneously. Cole's office had federal agents at the Newark terminal at 5:50. Silvio Mancini was detained at the gate attempting to board an international flight using a passport issued under a variant of his middle name, a document that a routine identity check confirmed within 6 minutes was not authentic. He was taken into custody without incident. He said nothing during the arrest that was worth recording. Sofia heard about it from Cole's assistant the following morning. A brief professional call confirming that the matter was proceeding and that she would be contacted regarding formal statement procedures in due course. She thanked the assistant, set the phone down on the kitchen counter, and stood there for a moment with her hand resting flat on the surface. Luca watched her from the doorway. "He's in custody," she said, not quite asking. "Yes." She nodded slowly. The nod of someone completing an internal accounting, checking a column of figures and finding that they add up to what she had expected, which is not the same as finding it easy to accept. "All right," she said. She poured her coffee. In the weeks that followed, the Mancini financial network began to come apart with the methodical momentum of a structure whose load-bearing elements have been removed. The Delaware holding companies were frozen within the first 10 days. The New Jersey construction firm was served with federal subpoenas. The Florida property management entity dissolved without announcement, which was itself treated as evidence. 3 of Silvio's senior associates entered separate counsel arrangements, which was the legal system's version of watching a wall develop cracks in 4 places at once. Sofia returned to her apartment in the Upper West Side on a Tuesday. Not because anyone told her it was safe, because she had assessed the situation herself, spoken with Cole's office about the current threat landscape, and determined that remaining in Brooklyn on an open-ended basis was no longer operationally necessary. She packed her bags with the same efficiency she had arrived with, returned the study to the configuration she had found it in, and left the legal dictionaries on the shelf she had used because they were heavy and she could retrieve them another time. She scheduled the tattoo removal appointment on the same day she returned home. The consultation was at a dermatology practice on the Upper East Side, a 3-session process, the technician explained, given the age and precision of the original work. Sofia listened to the explanation with the attentiveness she brought to all procedural information, asked 2 relevant questions, and confirmed the first appointment for the following week. She was not angry when she made the appointment. She had expected to be, had anticipated some residue of bitterness or grief that would accompany the decision. What she found instead was something quieter and more durable. Clarity. She knew who she was, where she had come from, and what had been done to shape the life she had been handed. She knew which parts of that life had been genuinely hers, and which had been constructed around her without her knowledge or consent. The tattoo belonged to the latter category. Removing it was not an act of erasure. It was an act of accurate accounting. The restaurant Luca chose was on the west side of the village, a neighborhood place with 12 tables and a menu that changed weekly, and no particular interest in being noticed by the publications that noticed such things. He had been there twice before. Nobody at the door required a name. They sat at a corner table. There were no visible security arrangements. If his people were outside, they were far enough back to be genuinely invisible rather than professionally unobtrusive, which was a distinction Sofia would have identified immediately and which he had considered when making the decision. She had worn burgundy, a simple cut, nothing constructed for effect. Her hair was down, which was the first time he had seen it that way outside of the hotel corridor on the night she had fainted. She looked, without the professional composure she carried in working hours, like someone who had recently set something heavy down and was reacquainting herself with the feeling of her own hands at rest. They ordered without ceremony. They ate and talked the way two people talk, when the weight of immediate purpose has lifted, and what remains is the actual texture of each other's company, which is more revealing than any high-stakes conversation, and both of them knew it. At one point, she said, "I've been thinking about what comes next professionally. Cole's office suggested that my profile in their system could open certain doors. Formal consultation work, longer engagements. Are you interested?" She considered the question with her characteristic deliberateness. "I think I might be. It's not what I planned. But I've learned recently that plans are primarily useful as a baseline from which everything actually interesting departs." He looked at her across the table. The restaurant moved around them at its own pace. Other tables, low conversation, the sound of a kitchen operating with calm competence somewhere behind the wall. "I'd like to see you again," he said. "Outside of circumstances that require either of us to have a prepared argument ready." She met his eyes with the directness he had first noticed in a hotel corridor when she was still deciding whether to trust the man holding her upright. "I'd like that too," she said. Neither of them said anything more about it. They didn't need to. Some things establish themselves more firmly in the space between words than in the words themselves, and both of them were fluent enough in what went unsaid to understand that this was one of them. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary rhythms, indifferent and continuous, and entirely unaware that two people at a corner table in a village restaurant had arrived at the beginning of something neither had anticipated and neither intended to name before it was ready. They finished their meal. They walked out into the cool night air of a city that had already moved on to its next 1,000 stories. And for the first time in longer than either of them could precisely identify, the next chapter felt like something that belonged entirely to them.